Swift Trainers, it's Prof. G, and in the next two lessons we're going to build our DetailView for the Catch-em-all app. In this lesson, we're going to set up the basics of the DetailView user interface, and we'll create a new class to handle the DetailView access. And in the next lesson, we'll download and display our image over the web using SwiftUI's async image. The big learning continues. So after the prior lesson, we downloaded our first page of 20 Pokemon by making an API call. Then we parsed the JSON and displayed them in a list. Now, let's create a detail view to show the details on any individual Pokemon that the user clicks on. So let's create our detail view by heading up to File, selecting New, File from Template. And this time, we want a SwiftUI view, and we'll call this Detail View. And let's delete what we have inside this view, and we'll start with the basic VStack. Now the first thing we'll put in here will be a text view. I'll pass in the string PokeName for now, and I'll put in a spacer below this to push it to the top. And let's use a custom font for the Pokemon name. We'll say .font and in parens capital F font .custom and select the option with name and size. And in the name, I'll enter the string that's the name of one of my favorite fonts, Avenir Next Condensed. The words are capitalized and there are spaces between them, and you've got to get that right or the font can't be found. And I'll set the size to 60. I'll add a bold modifier, set the minimum scale factor to 0.5, and I'll set the line limit to 1 just so that the entire creature name fits on a single line. Now the default alignment for a VStack is center, but I want this to be leading, so I'll add parens just after the VStack and add an alignment parameter, and I'll set this to .leading. Now it's still not showing up flush left, but it will when we add a separator below the text, and I'm going to do this with a thin rectangle. So I'll say rectangle with .frame with a height of 1, .foreground style with .gray, and I'll add .padding with .bottom. Now below this, I'm going to add the image with text of height and weight just to the right of it. So since these objects are aligned in a horizontal row, let's create an H-stack. And in between the curlies, I'm going to add an image, for now with a system name passing in the string, and really anyone will work, but how about figure.run.circle? That looks like a person running to catch 'em all, but it'll never appear in our final app, so this is just for laying out the user interface. And we'll make this resizable, scale to fit. We'll set .background to .white, and I'll set a frame with width and height, both 96. And around the corners, I'm going to use the new preferred method, which is .clipShape, passing in rounded rectangle with a quarter radius. I'll use 16. And I'm going to add a shadow with radius of 8 and X and Y of 5 each. Now I want to put a frame around this image, and I'm going to do that with an overlay modifier. We've done that before. And in between the curlies of .overlay, I'm going to put in a rounded rectangle with a quarter radius of 16, and I'll add a stroke modifier. And between the stroke parens, I'm going to add the color of .gray, and I'm going to tone this color down a little bit by entering .opacity after the gray, passing in 0.5. That just makes the gray border look more like a light gray border. I'll set the stroke's line width to 1. And I'm going to add some trailing padding just to give it a bit of space between the image and the height and weight that I'm about to add. And I'm noticing there's quite a bit of spacing between the text of the name and the horizontal line below this. That's my rectangle with the height of 1, but I can adjust the spacing by adding a spacing parameter to the VStack, and I do this between the parens after VStack. After the alignment of leading, I'm just going to add comma, spacing, and I'll set this equal to 3. And to push things out a little bit more, just at the bottom curly of the VStack, I'm going to add .padding with the standard padding. I think that looks better. Now just to the right of the image, I want to add the word height followed by the number that is the height. And so since I want these two text views to be side by side, inside this H-stack below the image, I'm going to enter another H-stack. Then between the curlies, I'm going to add a text view, passing in the string height with a colon in it. And then I'll set the font to title 2, add a bold modifier, and the foreground style to red. Below this, I'll add another text view for the number, passing in the string 999.9. This is just a placeholder for now. And I'll set the font to large, and I'll add a bold modifier. And I'd like both of these text views to be top aligned. They're middle aligned right now. And I can do this by adding parens just after the H-stack before the open curly, and I'm going to add an alignment parameter in here, passing in .top. And now the two text views are top aligned, looking good. Now the weight is going to be just below the height, and it's otherwise going to look just like what I've entered for the height above this. So I'm going to right-click on H-stack and select Embed in VStack. Then I'll highlight this H-stack with the height and the 9999 in it, and copy it and paste it down below, and just change the second height to weight. And that looks good. So now let's pass over the Pokemon name from our list so that we can display it in the detail view. And in order to do this, I'd like to take the struct that we created to hold the Pokemon name, That's the struct that's got the Pokemon name in the URL, and I want to break it out into a separate struct file so that we can use it in this view as well. So why don't we head over to our creatures class. This is the struct that I want right here. It's currently named result. And remember, the names of the properties of the struct, these are our variables here, have to match the key values of the JSON. But the structs themselves can actually be any valid struct name. So I'm going to change this struct name from result to creature, since I think creature is a better name for this struct that has the creature name in the URL. So I'm going to right click on capital R result in the struct definition, then select refactor rename, then I'll enter creature with a capital C and press return, and that change has been made. So see how results with a lowercase r up here is now an array of capital C creature structs. Totally fine. The thing we don't want to change is the variable results in lowercase. And I'd like to use this creature struct on my DetailView page. This would let me use one variable to refer to the name and URL, and also to pass a variable over from my creature list view, so that when I click on a creature in the list, I can pass it over with a navigation link so that it's received by the DetailView. Now, unfortunately, I can't really do this, and that's related to scope. Let me show you how, and you can follow along if you want. So since the creature struct is defined inside the creatures, plural, class, it's only available inside of this class. Watch what happens if I head over to the detail view and I try to create a value to hold a creature type. So I'm going to say let creature lowercase colon capital C creature singular uppercase, but code completion shows creatures plural but not creature singular. It's not available here. Its scope is limited because it's only inside of that creatures class. Now I could try to type the name of that struct capital C creature singular. See the error that I get here? Can't find creature in scope. Now I could refer to capital C creatures plural, that's the class, and then say dot capital C creatures singular, that's the struct. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to the creatures class. I'm going to highlight the creature struct singular, cut that out, and then I'm going to create a new file to hold that struct in, and when it's in its separate file, it'll have project-wide scope. Now I can create this new file in lots of ways. This time, instead of going up to the File menu, I'm going to right-click on the creatures file in the Project Navigator and select New File from Template. I could have clicked anywhere in the Project Navigator. I didn't have to click on the creatures file specifically. Same thing. This is going to be a Swift file. I'm going to name this capital C creature singular. And now that this file's created, I'm going to paste in my struct. And since it's outside the class, the entire app now has access to capital C creature singular. Now this creature data type, this struct is available everywhere, so if we head back to detail view, I can say let creature lowercase colon creature uppercase, and look at this, code completion now recognizes creature singular uppercase because it's outside of any class. It has project-wide scope. Cool. And now this value that I just created, I declared it but didn't initialize it, this is expecting a value to be passed into it from its parent view. So we need to head over to the creatures list view and make sure that we pass this over as part of a navigation link. And by the way, it's okay that this is a let constant because it's read-only data. I'm never going to be changing the name of a Pokemon. Those are set by the Pokemon Corporation. So let's head back to our creatures list view. And inside the list, let's add a navigation link. We've done that before. Select the option with destination and label, and we'll press return to get the two closures. And for the label, I'm just going to cut out the text view that I have down here. I'm going to paste that into the label area. And for the destination, that's going to be DetailView. And as we start to type DetailView, we see that Xcode wants us to pass in a creature as well. That's because we've got the declared but not initialized creature value that we just created in the DetailView. Nice. Now remember, when we set up our list here, we're going through the creatures creature array, and every element of creature array is one of those creature structs. So that's exactly what we want to pass in here. So we'll just put in lowercase creature. That's the name of the value that holds each individual creature as we iterate through the creatures array. Now before everything works, we've got to change the preview provider that's in our detail view. So let's head over there. So we get an error down here, and the reason for this is because now we have a creature value that's declared but not initialized in our detail view. So every time we refer to creating a detail view, and that's what we're doing here, we need to pass in that creature value. So if I backspace over the detail view and retype it, now instead of having just empty parens, it wants a creature to be added in here. So I'm going to add the creature with a capital C creature, and so to initialize or to create a new creature object from the creature class, we need to pass in a name and a URL. And for the name, I'm just going to pass in Bulbasaur. And for the URL, why don't we head over to the JSON, and I'm actually going to copy Bulbasaur's URL here in the JSON, and I'll head back to the preview provider and paste it between double quotes. So now I've got a valid URL. We're not going to use this right away, but we will later on in this lesson. So now I'm going to head to the very top, and where I was passing in the generic string PokeName, now I can refer to creature.name. And we see Bulbasaur in here because that's what we passed in when we created a new creature struct in the preview down below. So now let's head back over to creature list view and let's try this out. We can click on Venusaur, nice, go back, Wartortle, looking good. Now I'd like the creature names to be capitalized, but that's easy to do. So down here in the label of the navigation link, after creature.name, I'm going to add .capitalized. And I'm also going to head back to the detail view, and in my first text view in the VStack, after creature.name, I'm also going to add .capitalized. That fixes things. So now we're going to get data for the creature that the user's clicked on. And to do this, we're going to create a new class, and it's going to have a structure and get data method that'll work pretty much like the other view model that we've already created. But before we do that, let's look at what we want to get. So if we head over to our browser and take a look at the Pokemon JSON, and we click on the URL under a Pokemon name, I'll do that for Bulbasaur, this brings us to a new web page, and this has a ton of stats on the Bulbasaur Pokemon. Now I'm going to collapse these little expansion triangles, but you can see abilities, forms, moves, species, and lots more. Now I collapse them all the way down so that we can find height and weight. Now weight is down here, it's called weight lowercase, and it returns a number, and height is up here. This is height in lowercase, and it also returns a number. Now there's one additional thing that we want, and that's an image. Now we're going to learn about how to get images in the next lesson, but right now I do want us to get the URL so that we can use that in the next lesson. Now the URLs for the images are in this area called sprites. A sprite is a computer term for an image, and if I expand on sprites, the image that I want is this one here called front_default. So the key sprites contains a bunch of other keys nested inside of it, and the one that I want is front_default, which has a string value inside of it. It's a URL. And just to show you, if I click this URL, you see a little Bulbasaur up top. So that's what we're eventually going to get in the next lesson. So now that we know what we want, let's create a new class for this individual creature detail. And instead of typing this in from scratch, let's copy what we've created in the creatures class and modify it. I want to highlight all of the code in this class and copy it. And now let's create a new view model for our creatures detail. So in the project navigator, I'm going to right click and select new file from template. And this is going to be a Swift file. And I'm going to name this class creature detail. And in here, I'll paste in all the code that I just copied. And we're ready to modify this. And let's clear out the properties inside of our return struct. We'll enter new values for the detail view in here. And let's also get rid of the other properties that are part of this class. We'll enter new values for our new class. And our getData function will be mostly the same except for JSON decoding. So in the do clause below the guard statement, highlight and delete these 3 lines. We don't need them. Now the other errors we're getting in here are because we don't have a URL string property in this class, so let's add one. Ooh, and I almost forgot, we got to change the name of the class to creature detail, upper camel case. And we'll add the URL string below the private struct with var URL string equals, and we'll set this equal to the empty string for now. We're eventually going to update this with the proper string for the Pokemon that the user clicked on. So now we need to create our data structure so that we can effectively parse out the JSON that we want. And you remember that? We want a height and a weight. Both of those are at the first level of the JSON, so we can put them right inside our first struct, our return struct in this example. So we'll add properties in the return struct, var height, double, and I'm not sure if any of the Pokemon are fractional heights, but just in case, I'm going to create this as a double value. Even if I get back only integers, there's no problem. So integer JSONs can flow right into doubles. Swift won't complain about that. And below this, I'll also say var weight double. Now this return struct is for getting the JSON, but once we have the JSON in this struct, why don't we take these values and map them to properties in our class? Because when we're creating the interface to hold the creature detail, we're not going to want the return struct, we just want the 2 values that are inside of it. So why don't we create that below our URL string? We'll say var height equals 0.0 and var weight equals 0.0. And remember, we also need the URL that holds the Pokemon image. Remember, that's inside of a key called sprites. So back in the returned struct, I'm going to add var sprites. That's in lowercase. It's got to be spelled exactly the same way it is in JSON, and it is here. And I'll say capital S sprite. Now, I haven't created that struct yet, but we're going to do that below. Again, I could have called this struct anything, but I think sprite is a good descriptive name. So we'll say struct sprite with a capital S, codable, critically important. Any structs that are used to decode JSON need to be codable. open and close curlies, and sometimes I like to go to the JSON and actually highlight and copy the key names to make sure that I don't have any typos. This is a pretty simple name here, front_default. I really didn't need to do this, but just to demonstrate that this is possible, head back to Xcode, enter var, paste that in, front default, colon, and follow that with string. And then down here with our other class properties, we'll create another class property to hold this value. So we'll say var, we'll call this image URL, and we'll initially set that equal to the empty string. Now let's decode the JSON. So we don't have anything down after we get our returned value back. That's the value that's got our JSON in it. But below the guard statement, we'll add self.height equals returned.height, self.weight equals returned.weight, and self.imageURL equals returned.sprites, and we got to go one level deeper, .front default. And now let's head back to DetailView and use this in our new class. Now here's how we're going to take advantage of the creature detail we just created. We're going to create a new state variable, state private var creature detail lower camel case equals creature detail upper camel case open and close parens. And now that we have a creature detail object, it's got that new getData function that we just wrote, and we can use that to get the Pokemon details. Now let's find the height in our VStack, and we'll change the placeholder string 999.9 with creature detail.height, but this isn't gonna work because if we look in code completion, ooh, this is a double and text needs a string. Now I'm actually gonna show you how we can convert a double to a string in a format that guarantees that we'll have a single decimal place. So it'll round it back if we have more than one decimal places, or if we don't have any decimal places, it will add a single decimal place. Now I'm gonna show you this next technique with the caveat that there are multiple ways to convert number formats. There's actually an Apple class called Number Formatter. It's very powerful, but it's also, I think, a little tougher to set up. So we're going to skip Number Formatter for now, and we're going to use a quick and dirty technique because the real focus of our work is the API call and the JSON parsing. We'll cover Number Formatter in a future lesson. So I'm going to highlight and delete creature detail.height and replace it with string, capital S, so it's the name of the type. And I get a few options for initializing or creating a new string. And look at this one down here that has format and arguments. So select that. This is going to let us use standard formatting strings to format any value that we pass in here into a particular numerical format. Now the format that we're going to use is specified by something called a format string. These are sometimes called format specifiers. Format strings are fairly standard among computer languages, but they are not at all user-friendly. I'm going to show you the string format for a single decimal place. So in between double quotes, again, this is a format string, so we need to enter this as a string. We'll enter %, dot, the number 1 in a lowercase f. That's it, and believe it or not, this is a standard code to be able to format a number to 1 decimal point. And it was kind of nice. I don't know if you saw, but predictive code completion suggested this. So it's really nice, even if you don't remember this, that it looks like the AI that's built into Xcode is now smart enough to be able to make a pretty good guess as to what you might want in here. If you want to do 2 decimal points, just swap out the 1 for a 2, etc. Again, it's ugly, but this is worth knowing. If you ever needed more information on format specifiers, Apple actually has a page that shows all of the different codes that are available, and this isn't an Apple standard, it's an IEEE standard. So again, you'll find these same codes used in lots of different programming languages, not just Swift. And the arguments are just the values that we want to format. For us, there's only one argument. That's creature detail.height, our double value. And we don't see anything in here yet, but we will when we access our data. And I want to use this on weight, so I'm going to copy this whole text line with the formatter and everything. And I'll paste this over the text field that says 999.9 underneath weight. But we need to change .height to .weight in here. And with that taken care of, we're ready to make our call to the creature detail objects getData method. We want to do that when the detail view first appears, and we're going to do this pretty much the same way we did with the creatures list view. We're going to use a task modifier. So why don't we put this at the bottom of the VStack. I'm going to code fold so I can make sure where I'm entering this at the bottom of the VStack, and I'll just enter .task, and inside the curlies, I'll call creature detail.getData. But do you remember we're going to get an error if we just enter this like this? Remember why? We see code completion marks this as an async function. Oh yeah, Xcode reminds us expression is async, but it's not marked with await. We've got to have await out front of this expression. So we'll click on fix, and Xcode adds a weight out front. Problem solved, but there's one more critical thing we need to do. Let's update the URL string for creature detail VM so that we use the proper URL for the Pokemon that we clicked on. Remember, when we click on a Pokemon, not only do we send over the name, but we send over the URL. Remember, the getData function accesses JSON using the URL in a property called URL string. But we don't have a URL string for creature detail. We actually need to get that from the creature variable that we passed in when we clicked on it in the earlier view. So this creature variable has a URL property, which takes us to the detail for the particular creature or Pokemon. And we need to make the URL string updated in creature detail before we call creature detail getData, or getData won't get the valid URL. Now this is pretty easy. Just above our call to creature detail.getData, we're going to say creature detail.url string equals creature.url, and that's it. If we clicked on Bulbasaur, for example, as I'm showing here, that'll pass the Bulbasaur URL to the creature detail object, so it can now use that URL to get the new page of JSON, just as if I'm clicking on it here, that has our height, our weight, and inside of sprites, our front default. So I'll just add a comment at the end of the updating of URL string that says URL passed over in getDetail for creature detail. So now let's head over to creature list view and see how things are working. Click on Charizard, and we see that it has a height of 17 and a weight of 905. I'm not sure what that weight is in. It sounds pretty big, but don't body shame Charizard. We'll go back. How about Wartortle? Not as girthy at 225, so this is looking good. There's just one more thing I'd like to do in this lesson. I'd like my height and weight to be left aligned, but that's easy to do. We'll just head back to DetailView. We'll find the VStack that contains the height and weight and just add parens before the curly, enter an alignment parameter, and we'll set this to .leading. And that moves the height and weight over to left alignment. Looking good. Swifter, you should feel great about the fact that you wrote yet another view model, accessing a different page with differently structured JSON. We figured out how we were able to reuse a significant portion of our code as well. We learned about format strings. In the next video, we're going to learn how we can get that image and put it in our image view, and we'll do that using SwiftUI's async image. Until then, continue to hack.